So one morning last winter, I was driving down Big Bend here to church, like I have for the last 15 years. And I was somewhere in Maplewood when someone threw a rock against the passenger side window of my car. Whack! And the sound was so loud that I thought surely the window must be broken. So I looked over, and there was a car next to me. It was some kind of muscle car, I would call it, and the windows were tinted completely black, so I couldn't see the driver. And I thought, did someone just throw something at my car from that car and then roll the window up real quick? So you all know that I have opinions about driving. And one opinion I don't think I've shared with you in the last 15 years is that I don't like tinted windows. In fact, I hope you don't have really dark tinted windows. I think they should be illegal. And here's why: because you can't see through them. So when you have these cars in front of you completely tinted, they're like a billboard. You can't see what's going on. You can't see other cars. You can't see people crossing the street. So I just think they're really dangerous. So I do not like tinted windows. So I was judging that other driver on two counts. One, that someone in his car threw something at my car, and that he didn't have the sense to have clear windows. Again, sorry if you have tinted windows. So a few days later, the exact same thing happened again at the same place. And this time, there weren't any other cars around me. And I thought, are kids camped out here in Maplewood throwing rocks at cars? What's wrong with their parents? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Why aren't they at school? And part of the reason that popped into my head is when I was a kid, I threw rocks at cars and hid in bushes. So sometime later, it happened a third time, and it happened a fourth time on the highway. Thwack! Again, right against the driver's side window. And that finally got me thinking. Maybe nobody's throwing anything at my car at all. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's time to stop and take a breath and look deeply and investigate. So that's what I did. So I investigated, and what I found was in the driver's side door storage compartment was this plastic bottle of hand sanitizer. And then I put on like my fourth grade science, glasses, and I was like, this is what I think happened. So overnight, and it was a time when it was really cold, overnight, the contents of that hand sanitizer bottle would contract. And then as I drove the car with the heat on, it started to warm up, and the contents would expand. And at some point along the way, that bottle would snap back into shape. And when it did, it was really loud, and it sounded just like a rock hitting the side of the car. So as it turned out, though I was really upset and angry, no one was doing anything to me at all. And I think it's that way with a lot of our judgments, our fears, and our angers. No one's doing anything to us at all. It's just based on our misperception. So our scriptures remind us over and over and over again to be careful about judging. Judging ourselves as not good enough, judging ourselves as better than others, judging others as no good, judging what happens as something that's not supposed to be happening. The Bible tells us over and over again to be slow to judge. And I think that's really pretty good advice. But unfortunately, the Christian church has become famous for judging others. So when I was growing up in the church, we were, of course, taught to judge gay people, but we were taught to judge Catholics. We were taught to judge people who didn't come to church. We were taught to judge people who smoked or drank. And as I've told you, some of us were taught to judge people who danced. So unfortunately, the Christian church has become famous for judging others. But, here's the thing. Jesus talked a lot about how we should not judge other people. Jesus didn't talk at all about gay people or drinking alcohol in a negative sense or smoking cigarettes. So it's funny to me that the church has been so quick to judge and to teach people to judge. Not only judging those outside of church, but judging its own members. And I'm sure you've had this experience. I have encountered dozens and dozens and dozens of people in my time as a pastor who grew up in church, who went to church every Sunday, and who now cannot abide religion because they were judged so harshly by their own church, by people who were supposed to love them. So, as I said, a lot of judging begins at misperception. We misperceive something, about someone else, and we're led to judge. We don't see the whole picture, and so we call something bad. So that's what happened to me with that bottle of hand sanitizer. But the same sort of thing happens to most of us several times a day, and we should be on the lookout for it. So just this week, I was talking to a stranger, someone I hadn't met, and I just happened to say, we really could use some rain, right? And she said to me, I don't need rain. I'd be happy if it never rained again. So we might say that about a cold, rainy day, right? Ugh, what a miserable day. We might be saying that, and in the same time, a farmer somewhere is rejoicing and thanking God for this amazing day full of life-giving rain. So as Eckhart Tolle reminds us, the day itself isn't good or bad. It is as it is. It's our reaction to the day that is good or bad. It's our judgment that makes something good or bad. And I think our tendency to judge other people is pretty much just like that. It's rooted in misperception, in not being able to see people as who they truly are, in not being able to see people as Jesus sees them. So in today's gospel, self-righteous religious leaders are caught judging Jesus because he welcomes people that they judge are unworthy. So it's a sort of double judgment going on here. And these religious leaders grumble and say, Jesus welcomes sinners and eats with them. So what they're talking about is tax collectors and sinners. And I think most of you are aware of this. Tax collectors were generally despised because they were Jewish people who worked for Rome, and they collected taxes from their own people. They collected taxes for this empire that was oppressing them, and they often were viewed as people who cheated their fellow citizens out of their money. Sinners, that's a little bit different. Sinners in this context are people who are not religious. For one reason or another, they don't follow the law. And the truth is, sometimes this was because they were poor and they just couldn't afford to be religious. So some have argued that some people categorized as sinners were not religious because it was a kind of pay-to-play system and they just didn't have what they needed. So they might not have had free time because they were laborers to participate, and they might not have had extra money to participate. So you might remember when Jesus cleansed the temple, part of what he was doing there was disrupting a system that turned the temple into a marketplace. And when you turn it into the marketplace, you exclude people who can't afford to be there, who can't afford to make the sacrifices. So you're called a sinner just because you don't have the means to participate. So anyway, the religious leaders are complaining about Jesus, that he's spending time with these sinful people, and Jesus tells a couple parables to try and set them straight. In the first parable, he says this. He asks this question: which of you, if you had 100 sheep and one of them went astray, would not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go find the one sheep that was lost? Which of you would not go and find that one lost sheep? And the obvious answer to that question, especially among these religious leaders, I think, is none of us would do that. None of us would leave 99 sheep in the wilderness to go after one. None of us would leave 99 where they are likely to be killed by some wild animal or hurt or stolen to go after one, especially if it's a bad sheep. It makes no economic sense. Losing one sheep is just the cost of doing business. And if we're talking about a sinner, Why would you leave 99 good people to go after one bad apple? But Jesus sees the world in a different way. The lost one is not a commodity. The lost one is not the cost of doing business. The lost one is not only a sinner. The lost one is a brother or a sister or a sibling. The lost one is a precious member of the family, a precious child. The lost one is not bad. They're just lost. So who among you would not do anything and everything to find your precious child who is lost? So again, it's a matter of perception or maybe of misperception. The self-righteous religious leaders see a worthless sinner, and Jesus sees a beloved child of God. So the second parable is probably more compelling to those listening. In that parable, a woman loses one silver coin. The silver coin is a drachma. It was the regular daily wage in those days. So if you lost a day's wages somewhere in your house, you would probably take some time searching for it. Again, though, the message is the same. The one that is lost is not a worthless sinner. It's not something to be discarded. The thing lost is something precious. And when you lose something precious, truly precious to you, you seek it out with all your heart. So now I don't have to tell you that we Americans are having some trouble these days seeing one another as precious, especially if we're on the opposite sides of the political spectrum. And in fact, after the killing of Charlie Kirk on Wednesday, we have seen just how quick we are as a nation to pass harsh judgment on those who are not like us, don't think like us, don't believe like us. So here's the danger of always passing judgment. It starts small and it grows. So it moves from, I don't like that, to I don't like them, to I can't stand them, to they are ruining our way of life, to they need to die. So the misperception and anger and rage and hatred that came immediately after Kirk was killed nearly eclipsed the fact that the next day was the 24th anniversary of the attacks of September 11th. Eclipsed yet another school shooting. So what all these events have in common is that some human being or human beings were judged as not worthy to live, and so others felt perfectly justified in killing them. So whatever else is going on, those killed were not viewed as precious. It's a misperception of who they are. They were not viewed as precious. They were not seen as Jesus sees them. And of course, the same thing happens all the time, all around the world. So just think of the October attack on Israel, how heartless that was. And then the response in Gaza, the tens of thousands of innocent people killed. All the killing that's been going on in Ukraine, the mass incarceration of black and brown people, school shootings, the thousands, tens of thousands of gun deaths in our country each year. Again, if we saw these people as Jesus saw them, as precious, as beloved, we would not stand for all this killing. We would not seek to destroy our enemies. We would seek to redeem them. As Jesus said from the cross, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And in today's epistle, St. Paul actually leads us into that direction, into that possibility of forgiving someone because they don't know what they're doing, because they are caught up in misperception. So the first thing that Paul says is that we no longer view people from a human point of view. And actually, this is one instance where the King James Version, I think, is a better translation than the new RSV. So the King James Version says something like this: we no longer, we regard no one according to the flesh. not from a human point of view, but according to the flesh. So Paul often uses this word flesh, and when you don't translate it flesh, you don't really know what he's talking about. So St. Paul has this idea that we have to live in balance, a life between the flesh and the spirit. So he's always talking about the flesh and the spirit. And so for Paul, the flesh is the world of form that is always temporary. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with the world of form, except it's temporary, like your flesh. But there's also a world of the spirit that is eternal. And so we are part of the world of flesh, and we are also part of the world of spirit. We are human, and we are being. And so in the world of flesh, people make mistakes. We all make mistakes. People sin. We all sin, especially when we hurt one another, especially when we preach hatred for one another. But that's not the totality of who we are. We are human, but we are also being. And our being side is one with the Spirit of God, with the Spirit of Christ. One with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness. Now, I admit, it is not always easy to see that in other people. And there are some people, probably in our lives, but certainly in the leadership of the world, who have just the tiniest smidgen of those characteristics. Like, they might have gentleness toward their own children, and you could see it there, but they have no gentleness towards anyone else's. And yet, they have some tiny bit of gentleness. So it may be hard to see, but it is there. And I think that's how Jesus could be led to say, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. It's not that they're fully evil. They just are caught up in misperception. They don't know what they're doing. And yet, it's also misperception for us to only see the human side of another person, to only see the flesh, to only see what's temporary, and then to judge. So what St. Paul is suggesting here is that if we can see both the flesh and the spirit in others, that is, if we can begin to see like Jesus, we can actually become like Jesus. And actually, the language here is really remarkable. He has such a high view of human beings, especially in the church. He says we can become ambassadors for Christ. So think of that. Christ is your king, and you are sent out into the world to be an ambassador to the nations, preaching love, joy, and peace. He says that God is making God's appeal to the world through us. Through us. God is speaking through us. He says in the end, we can become the righteousness of God. And so Paul says now our life's goal is to be ministers of reconciliation. So the Greek word here that's translated reconciliation can mean something like this: to change a relationship completely so that it is harmonious. So what we are supposed to be doing as ministers of reconciliation is seeing places where there is no harmony and going out and trying to create complete harmony in those relationships. We are ministers of reconciliation, bringers of harmony, and it occurs to me that this sort of boils down to something Jesus says in Matthew's Gospel: blessed are the peacemakers. We are blessed when we are peacemakers. So our role as followers of Jesus is to be ministers of reconciliation, ministers of peace. And bringing peace begins when we step away from judgment and become friendly with all of life. When we step away from judgment and begin to be friendly with all people. So whatever happens, we say to ourselves, I am here to make peace and not war. Peace with what happens, peace with my neighbors, peace with my family, peace with strangers, peace with my enemies, peace when I am on social media, peace in my actions, peace in my speech. Whatever happens, I am here to make peace and not war. And with this, the whole world tilts just a little bit from judgment towards love. We can step away from judgment and see the world as Christ sees the world. We can move just a little bit from judgment towards love. And we begin to make all the difference in the world. Thanks be to Christ.